Officer Jake Martinez checked his watch as he drove his patrol vehicle through the dusty roads around New Denver Colony. The sun was setting behind the purple mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that still amazed him even after 3 years on this distant planet. His shift was almost over, and he was looking forward to getting home to his small apartment and the leftover pizza waiting in his fridge. The radio crackled with the usual end-of-day chatter from headquarters. Nothing exciting ever happened on the outer rim of the colony where Jake patrolled. Most of his job involved checking on the automated mining equipment and making sure the sensor arrays were working properly. Sometimes he would help lost hikers or deal with minor disputes between neighbors. But that was about as thrilling as it got. Jake was about to turn his vehicle around and head back to town when something strange happened. A sharp pain shot through his head, followed by a series of urgent pulses that seemed to come from inside his skull. He pulled over and rubbed his temples, thinking it might be a headache coming on. But the pulses continued, and they had a pattern to them that seemed almost like a message. His neural implant, the small device that all colony officers had installed to help them communicate and access information, was picking up something unusual. The translation software that normally helped him understand the few alien languages in the galactic database was going crazy, flashing error messages and unable to make sense of whatever was sending the signal. Jake got out of his vehicle and looked around. The landscape was empty except for the usual purple grass and scattered rocks. But the signals were getting stronger, and they seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby. He followed his instincts and walked toward a cluster of large boulders about 200 meters away. As he got closer, Jake heard something that made him stop in his tracks. It was a sound unlike anything he had ever heard before, a low whining noise that seemed to express pure desperation. He quickened his pace and rounded the largest boulder, then froze at what he saw. 2 creatures lay in a small clearing between the rocks. They were unlike anything in the colony's database of known alien species. Each was about the size of a large dog from Earth, covered in thick fur that shimmered with an unusual blue-green color. They had 4 legs, long tails, and heads that were definitely not canine despite the superficial resemblance. One of the creatures was clearly injured. Blue liquid that Jake assumed was blood pooled beneath its body, and one of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. The creature's breathing was shallow and rapid, and its eyes were closed. The other creature was pacing frantically around its injured companion. When it saw Jake, it stopped and stared directly at him with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. The healthy creature looked at Jake, then at its injured friend, then back at Jake again. It repeated this several times, and each time it looked at Jake, the urgent pulses in his head got stronger. Jake had been trained in first contact protocols, but this situation was not covered in any manual. The creature was clearly trying to communicate with him, and it seemed to understand that he was some kind of authority figure. His uniform and badge must have given that away somehow. The healthy creature approached Jake slowly, never taking its eyes off him. When it was close enough, it gently touched Jake's badge with what looked like a nose or snout. Then it returned to its injured companion and looked back at Jake with an expression that could only be described as pleading. Jake activated his emergency communicator and called for backup. He tried to keep his voice calm as he reported the situation to headquarters, but he could hear the excitement in his own words. This was the first contact with an unknown alien species in the colony's history. While he waited for help to arrive, Jake observed the creatures more carefully. The injured one had what looked like burn marks on its side, as if it had been hit by some kind of energy weapon. The wounds were serious, and Jake could see that the creature was losing a lot of blood. The healthy creature never stopped moving. It would check on its companion, then look at Jake, then pace in a small circle before starting the process over again. Every few minutes it would approach Jake and touch his badge again, as if reminding him that it was asking for help. Jake found himself talking to the creature in a gentle voice, the way he might talk to a frightened animal back on Earth. He told it that help was coming and that they would do everything they could to save its friend. The creature seemed to understand his tone, if not his words, and it became slightly less agitated. 20 minutes later, Jake heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Dr. Lisa Park, the colony's xenobiologist, arrived first in her research truck, followed by a medical team and Captain Ben Rodriguez. Jake had never been so happy to see his boss. Dr. Park approached the scene with professional calm, but Jake could see the excitement in her eyes. She had spent years studying alien life forms, but most of her work involved examining specimens or analyzing data from other colonies. This was her first chance to observe living, intelligent aliens up close. The healthy creature watched the newcomers carefully, but did not run away. Instead, it repeated the same behavior it had shown Jake, looking back and forth between the humans and its injured companion. When Dr. Park knelt down to examine the injured creature, the healthy one moved closer and watched every movement she made. Captain Rodriguez called for a full medical evacuation team and ordered the area secured. Within an hour, the clearing was full of people and equipment. The injured creature was carefully loaded onto a medical transport, and its companion refused to leave its side. As the convoy headed back to the colony, Jake sat in his patrol vehicle and tried to process what had just happened. He had started his shift expecting another boring evening of routine patrol, and instead he had become part of the most significant event in the colony's history. The creature had somehow known that he was law enforcement and had asked for help in the only way it could. That level of intelligence and understanding suggested that these beings were far more advanced than their animal-like appearance might suggest. Jake followed the medical convoy back to town, his mind racing with questions about where these creatures had come from and why one of them was so badly injured. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than anyone could imagine. Dr. Carlos Rivera had barely slept in the 2 days since performing emergency surgery on the alien creature they called Brave. He had set up a cot in the medical bay so he could monitor his patient around the clock, something that Loyal seemed to appreciate greatly. The healthy creature had not left the medical facility since the surgery. It slept curled up beside Brave's bed and followed Carlos everywhere he went during his rounds. When mealtimes came, Loyal would accept small portions of synthesized nutrients that Dr. Park had determined were safe for its physiology, but it always ate beside its companion. Carlos had treated many different species during his years as a veterinarian on Earth, and later as a xenomedic on frontier worlds, but he had never encountered patients quite like these two. Their level of emotional intelligence was remarkable, and their ability to understand human intentions seemed to grow stronger each day. On the morning of the third day, Carlos noticed that Brave's eyes were tracking movement around the room. The creature was finally becoming alert enough to be aware of its surroundings. When Loyal realized that its companion was conscious, it made a series of soft sounds that could only be described as joyful. Brave tried to lift its head to look around, but the movement caused obvious pain. Carlos immediately checked the surgical site and was pleased to see that the healing was progressing better than he had hoped. The alien physiology seemed to respond well to human medical techniques. Though he was still working largely by intuition, Loyal positioned itself where Brave could see it without having to strain, then began the same low humming that had helped during the surgery. This time, however, the sound was different. It was softer, and had a more complex pattern that seemed to carry emotional content rather than just calming vibrations. Dr. Park, who had been monitoring the creatures with various sensors, noticed immediate changes in both aliens' biological readings. The humming appeared to be a form of communication that operated on multiple levels simultaneously, combining sound waves with electromagnetic fields and possibly even quantum entanglement effects. Amy Cooper rushed into the medical bay with her portable communications equipment, excited by what her instruments were detecting. The quantum frequency transmissions from both creatures had become much more active now that Brave was conscious, and the patterns were clearly structured like language. Carlos watched in fascination as the two creatures engaged in what was obviously a conversation. Loyal would hum in certain patterns and Brave would respond with weaker but similar sounds. Occasionally, they would touch each other gently with their snouts, which seemed to enhance the communication. Captain Rodriguez arrived with a team of linguists and communication specialists who had been called in from other departments. The colony had experts in several alien languages, but none of them had ever encountered anything like the complex, multi-layered communication system the creatures were using. During the conversation between Loyal and Brave, something unexpected happened. Both creatures suddenly stopped communicating and looked directly at Jake Martinez, who had just entered the room. They made eye contact with him for several seconds, then turned to Dr. Park, then to Carlos, and finally to Captain Rodriguez. Amy Cooper's equipment detected a sudden spike in electromagnetic activity from both creatures. The quantum transmissions became much more focused and seemed to be directed specifically at the humans in the room. Then Brave did something that left everyone speechless. The injured creature slowly raised its head despite the obvious pain and looked directly at Carlos. It made a soft sound that was clearly different from its communication with Loyal, then lowered its head in what looked exactly like a bow of gratitude. Carlos felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized what was happening. Brave was thanking him for saving its life, and it had waited until it was strong enough to do so properly. Loyal approached Carlos and repeated the bowing gesture, then walked over to each person who had been involved in the rescue and medical treatment. Each time it made the same soft sound and performed the same respectful bow. Dr. Park realized that the creatures had been observing human behavior carefully and had learned to recognize individual humans and their roles in the community. They understood that different people had different responsibilities and that the medical team had worked together to save Brave's life. As the day progressed, both creatures became more active in their interactions with the humans. They seemed to understand that the medical bay was a safe place and that the humans were genuinely trying to help them. Loyal began following the medical staff on their rounds, watching their procedures and seeming to learn from their activities. Carlos decided to test something that had been on his mind since the surgery. He brought in a basic medical scanner and showed it to Loyal, demonstrating how it was used to check vital signs. Then he handed the device to the creature to see what would happen. Loyal examined the scanner carefully, holding it with surprising dexterity between its front paws. Then it approached Brave and ran the scanner over its companion's body in exactly the same pattern that Carlos had demonstrated. The device beeped and displayed readings that Carlos recognized as normal for alien physiology. The medical team exchanged amazed glances. Loyal had not only understood the purpose of the medical equipment, but had learned to use it correctly after a single demonstration. This level of intelligence and adaptability was unprecedented in any non-bipedal species they had encountered. Dr. Park began a series of simple tests to determine the extent of the creature's learning abilities. She showed them various medical instruments and procedures, and both Loyal and Brave quickly grasped their purposes. Within hours, they were actively assisting with their own medical care. Captain Rodriguez called another senior staff meeting to discuss the implications of what they were observing. The creatures were clearly intelligent, possibly more so than many of the recognized sentient species in the galaxy. Their ability to learn human procedures and adapt to human environments suggested that they might be refugees from a technologically advanced civilization. Amy Cooper had been working non-stop to decode the creature's communication system. She had made progress in identifying basic patterns and emotional content, but the full complexity of their language remained beyond human understanding. What she had discovered, however, was that the creatures were definitely trying to tell them something important. The quantum frequency transmissions contained geographical coordinates and what appeared to be temporal data. The creatures were not just communicating with each other. They were trying to share information about locations and events that might be significant to their situation. As evening approached, Carlos was pleased to see that Brave was becoming more alert and responsive. The creature was even managing to eat small amounts of food without assistance. The recovery was progressing faster than anyone had expected, which Carlos attributed to both the creature's remarkable physiology and the emotional support that Loyal provided. Before leaving for the night, Carlos spent a few minutes sitting quietly with both creatures. They seemed to enjoy human company and responded positively to gentle speech and careful physical contact. He found himself becoming attached to these remarkable beings and hoped that whatever had brought them to the colony would allow them to stay long enough to fully recover. Dr. Park remained in the medical bay for most of the night, continuing her observations and taking detailed notes. She had a growing sense that these creatures were going to teach humanity something important about intelligence, communication, and cooperation between species. As the colony settled into its nighttime routine, Loyal and Brave curled up together beside the medical bed. But their eyes remained alert, and their quantum transmissions continued throughout the night, carrying messages that the humans could not yet understand, but somehow felt were important for everyone's future. Dr. Lisa Park had seen many strange things during her career as a xenobiologist. But nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing in the colony's medical facility. The injured alien creature lay on the examination table, while its companion refused to leave the room despite repeated attempts by security to remove it. The healthy creature, which the medical staff had started calling loyal because of its devoted behavior, seemed to understand exactly what was happening around it. When Dr. Park approached the injured creature with a medical scanner, Loyal would watch carefully and then position itself where it could see both the equipment and its companion's face. Lisa had spent the first few hours running basic scans and tests to determine the creature's physiology. The injured one, now called Brave by the medical team, was definitely in critical condition. The burns on its side went deep into the tissue, and it had lost a significant amount of the blue fluid that served as its blood. What fascinated Lisa most was Loyal's behavior during the examination. The creature had somehow figured out that the humans were trying to help, and it was actively assisting in ways that defied explanation. When Lisa needed to turn Brave over to examine the wounds on its back, Loyal gently nudged its companion into the correct position. When the medical team brought in more advanced scanning equipment, Loyal watched the setup process intently. Then it did something that left everyone in the room speechless. It approached Officer Jake Martinez, who had stayed to observe the proceedings, and touched his badge with its snout. Then it walked over to Dr. Park and touched her medical badge. Finally, it returned to Brave and touched its companion's forehead gently. Captain Rodriguez, who had been watching from the observation window, entered the room with a puzzled expression. He had been in contact with xenobiologists from other colonies, but none of them had ever encountered anything like this behavior. Lisa explained her observations to the captain, while Loyal continued its vigil beside the examination table. The creature seemed to understand that badges indicated authority or expertise, and it was specifically seeking help from those who might be able to provide it. Dr. Carlos Rivera, the colony's veterinarian who had been pressed into service as a xenomedic, arrived with a portable surgical unit. He had experience treating Earth animals and had studied alien physiology, but he admitted that he was working mostly by instinct and educated guesswork. As Carlos began setting up for emergency surgery, Loyal became more agitated. It paced around the room, looking at the surgical equipment with what appeared to be concern. Carlos tried to explain what he was going to do, speaking in a calm voice as if he were talking to a frightened pet. Loyal stopped pacing and looked directly at Carlos. Then it approached the surgical table and very gently placed one paw on Brave's uninjured leg. It looked up at Carlos and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed permission and trust. The surgery took 3 hours. Carlos worked carefully to clean and repair the damaged tissue, while Lisa monitored Brave's vital signs on instruments that had been hastily recalibrated for alien physiology. Loyal remained by the table throughout the entire procedure, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to comfort its companion. During the most critical part of the surgery, when Brave's vital signs began to fluctuate dangerously, something extraordinary happened. Loyal began to emit a low, rhythmic humming sound that filled the room. The sound was unlike anything any of the humans had heard before, but it had an immediate effect on everyone present. The medical team found themselves feeling calmer and more focused. Their hands steadied, and their concentration improved. Even the monitoring equipment seemed to respond to the sound, with some of the readings becoming more stable. Lisa realized that Loyal was somehow contributing to the medical procedure. The humming sound appeared to have a beneficial effect on both human and alien physiology, promoting healing and reducing stress. It was as if the creature understood that emotional and physical calm would help its companion survive the surgery. As the hours passed, more colony staff gathered in the observation areas to watch the unprecedented procedure. Word had spread quickly through the settlement, and everyone wanted to see the first aliens that had ever been treated in their medical facility. Amy Cooper, the colony's communications specialist, had been working frantically to analyze the electromagnetic signatures that both creatures were producing. She had detected the same quantum frequency transmissions that had first alerted Jake to their presence, but the patterns were becoming more complex as time went on. When Carlos finally announced that the surgery was successful and that Brave's condition had stabilized, Loyal stopped humming and approached each member of the medical team in turn. To everyone's amazement, The creature performed what could only be described as a bow of gratitude to each person who had helped save its companion. Lisa documented every detail of the encounter in her research notes. The level of intelligence and emotional sophistication displayed by both creatures suggested that they were dealing with a highly advanced species that had simply evolved in a different direction than the bipedal, tool-using species that dominated most of known space. Captain Rodriguez called a meeting of the senior staff to discuss the situation. The injured creature would need several days of recovery time, and decisions had to be made about how to proceed. Protocol required that any first contact situation be reported to the colonial administration, but the captain was reluctant to bring in outside authorities until they understood more about what they were dealing with. Dr. Park suggested that they focus on learning to communicate with the creatures before making any official reports. She believed that Loyal and Brave had chosen to seek help from the human colony for a specific reason, and that reason might be important for everyone's safety. As the medical staff settled in for a long night of monitoring Brave's recovery, Loyal curled up on the floor beside the examination table. The creature's eyes remained open, keeping watch over its companion, but its breathing became slow and regular as if it finally felt safe enough to rest. Lisa remained in the medical bay, taking notes and observing the creature's behavior. She had a feeling that this encounter was going to change everything for the colony, and possibly for humanity's understanding of intelligence and cooperation among different species. Outside the medical facility, Jake Martinez continued his patrol duties, but his mind kept returning to the moment when Loyal had first looked at him with those pleading eyes. He had responded to thousands of calls for help during his career, but none had felt as important as this one. The night passed quietly, with both creatures resting peacefully under the care of the human medical team, but Lisa Park stayed awake, wondering what morning would bring and what other surprises these remarkable beings might have in store for them. Amy Cooper had been working for 18 hours straight, her eyes burning from staring at quantum frequency readouts and electromagnetic pattern analyses. Empty coffee cups littered her desk in the communications center, and her usually neat workspace was covered with printouts and data tablets displaying the most complex alien communication patterns anyone had ever encountered. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when she finally isolated a repeating sequence buried deep within the creature's transmissions. The pattern was incredibly sophisticated, using quantum entanglement effects to carry information across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. It was like finding a message written in a language that used not just words, but also colors, music, and emotions all at the same time. Amy called Dr. Park immediately, despite the early hour. Within 20 minutes, Lisa was in the communications center, along with Captain Rodriguez and several other senior staff members who had been awakened by the urgent call. The pattern that Amy had discovered was definitely artificial, meaning it had been created by intelligent beings rather than being a natural biological function. More importantly, it contained geographical coordinates that corresponded to locations within their own star system. Dr. Park examined the data carefully while Amy explained her analysis. The coordinates pointed to 3 different locations. One was the exact spot where Officer Martinez had found the creatures, another was in orbit around the planet, and the third was far out in the system's asteroid belt. Captain Rodriguez immediately ordered a sensor sweep of the indicated orbital coordinates. Within an hour, they had detected debris from what appeared to be a small spacecraft. The wreckage was in a decaying orbit and would burn up in the planet's atmosphere within a few days. The asteroid belt coordinates were more puzzling. Long-range sensors showed an unusual metallic signature in that location, but it was too far away to get detailed readings with the colony's equipment. Amy continued working on the translation while the sensor data was being analyzed. She had made enough progress to identify emotional content within the transmissions, and what she was finding deeply concerned her. The patterns contained overwhelming sadness, fear, and something that could only be described as grief for massive loss. By morning, Amy had decoded enough of the communication to understand that the creatures were not just refugees from a single incident. They were survivors of something much worse. The transmissions contained references to their homeworld and to many others of their kind who had not escaped whatever catastrophe had befallen them. Dr. Park brought the preliminary Translation results to the medical bay, where Loyal and Brave were continuing their recovery. When she began reading the decoded messages aloud, both creatures became very agitated. They exchanged rapid communications and then approached Dr. Park with obvious urgency. Loyal touched Dr. Park's communication device with its snout, then looked up at her with an expression that clearly meant it wanted to respond to what she had read. Amy quickly brought her portable translation equipment to the medical bay and began recording the creature's reactions. What followed was the most complex interspecies communication attempt in human history, using a combination of the partially decoded language, simple gestures, and the creature's remarkable ability to convey emotional content. They began to tell their story. The creatures were called the Kethmori, which roughly translated to those who feel with others. They were from a distant world that orbited a star near the galactic rim, far from any of the major trade routes or political centers that humans knew about. Their planet had been rich in rare minerals that were valuable for manufacturing advanced technology. For generations, the Kethmori had lived in harmony with their environment, using their natural empathic abilities to maintain balance in their ecosystem and their society. Then the Vorthak Empire had arrived. Amy's translation software had encountered references to the Vorthak before, but only as rumors and unconfirmed reports from the frontier regions. They were described as a ruthless faction that strip-mined planets for resources without regard for indigenous life. The Kethmori's empathic abilities had made them especially vulnerable to the Vorthak's psychological warfare tactics. The invaders had used fear and despair as weapons, broadcasting emotional torture that overwhelmed the Kethmori's sensitive minds and made organized resistance nearly impossible. Loyal and Brave were among the few survivors who had managed to escape during the final assault on their homeworld. They had stolen a small scout ship and fled into space, but the vessel had been damaged during their escape and had barely held together long enough to reach the human colony's star system. The debris in orbit was all that remained of their ship. They had crash-landed on the planet and had been hiding in the wilderness for several weeks, trying to decide what to do next. Brave had been injured when their ship's power core had exploded during the crash landing. Captain Rodriguez listened to the translation with growing concern. If the Kethmori's account was accurate, then the Vorthak Empire was expanding into previously unexplored regions of space. The human colony could potentially be in danger if the Vorthak decided to investigate this star system. But there was another aspect of the Kethmori's story that fascinated Dr. Park. According to the translation, Loyal and Brave had specifically sought out the human settlement after observing it from orbit before their crash. They had studied human behavior patterns and had concluded that humans might be willing to help refugees from another species. This was remarkable because it meant that the Kethmori had recognized something in human nature that they valued, even before making direct contact. Their empathic abilities had allowed them to sense the emotional patterns of the colony's inhabitants, and they had detected compassion and willingness to help others. Amy continued refining her translation throughout the day, and more details of the Kethmori's story emerged. Their species had developed advanced biotechnology, rather than mechanical technology, using their empathic abilities to work in harmony with living systems. Their ships were grown rather than built, and their cities were integrated into natural ecosystems. The Vorthak had been particularly interested in the Kethmori's biotechnology, especially their ability to create living computers and organic spacecraft. The invasion had been as much about capturing technology as it had been about mining resources. Loyal and Brave carried genetic templates for much of their species, biotechnology, and their own cellular structure. They were essentially living libraries of their civilization's knowledge, which made them incredibly valuable to anyone who could learn to decode and use that information. Dr. Park realized that the colony had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple first contact situation. The Kethmori were not just refugees seeking shelter. They were the keepers of an entire civilization's knowledge and possibly the last hope for their species' survival. Captain Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of the Colony Council to discuss the situation. The presence of the Kethmori raised serious questions about the colony's security and its obligations to provide sanctuary for refugees from interstellar conflicts. As the day ended, Amy Cooper sat in her communications center, staring at the latest batch of decoded transmissions. The Kethmori were still broadcasting on quantum frequencies, sending messages into space that no one else seemed to be receiving. She realized that they were calling out to any other survivors of their species who might be hiding somewhere in the galaxy. The message was simple but heartbreaking in its loneliness. It said, in the complex, multi-layered language of the Kethmori, "We are here, we are alive, and we have found friends who will help us." Amy hoped that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, other survivors would hear that message and know that they were not alone. But she also wondered if the Vorthak might be listening too, and what that might mean for everyone on New Denver Colony. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood in his office, looking out at the bustling activity of New Denver Colony, while trying to process everything that had happened in the past week. The presence of Loyal and Brave had changed the entire dynamic of the settlement, and he was beginning to understand that the changes were only just beginning. Dr. Park had spent the morning briefing him on her latest discoveries about the Kethmori's abilities. Their empathic powers were far more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. They could not only sense emotions across species barriers, but they could also detect intentions, truthfulness, and even predict behavior patterns based on emotional states. This revelation had come about during a routine security interview that Jake Martinez had been conducting with other colony residents about the alien encounter. Loyal had been present during the interviews, and Dr. Park had noticed that the creature's behavior changed depending on who was being questioned. When people were telling the truth, Loyal remained calm and attentive. But when someone tried to exaggerate their role in the rescue or gave inaccurate information, Loyal became agitated and would look directly at the interviewer with obvious concern. Dr. Park had tested this ability more formally by having various colonists tell prepared stories that were either true or false while Loyal observed. The creature's accuracy in detecting deception was perfect, which suggested that Kethmori empathic abilities were essentially biological lie detectors that worked across species. Captain Rodriguez immediately recognized the enormous implications of this discovery. If the Kethmori could reliably detect deception and predict behavior, they could revolutionize human diplomatic and security operations. But more importantly for the immediate situation, it meant that Loyal and Brave could help identify whether any colonists posed a security risk. The captain had been worried about potential Vorthak infiltrators or sympathizers ever since learning about the Empire's expansion into this region of space. The colony's security systems were designed to handle local threats, not sophisticated alien intelligence operations. Dr. Carlos Rivera had been observing the Kethmori's learning abilities and had made his own remarkable discovery. Both creatures seemed to understand not just individual human emotions, but also group dynamics and social structures. They had quickly identified the colony's leadership hierarchy and had adapted their behavior accordingly. When Captain Rodriguez entered a room, both Kethmori would acknowledge his authority with subtle changes in posture and attention. They showed respect to Dr. Park's expertise by following her instructions without question. They demonstrated affection for Carlos by seeking him out when they needed comfort or medical attention. Most remarkably, they had begun to integrate themselves into the colony's daily routines. Loyal would accompany Jake Martinez on some of his patrol rounds, apparently enjoying the opportunity to observe different parts of the settlement. Brave, still recovering but growing stronger each day, had started spending time in the children's area of the colony, where the young humans seemed fascinated by the gentle alien's presence. Amy Cooper had made another breakthrough in her translation work. She had discovered that the Kethmori's quantum frequency transmissions were not just communication. They were also a form of technological interface. The creatures could directly control certain types of equipment using their bioelectric fields, which explained how they had been able to operate biotechnology on their homeworld. This discovery came about when Brave had somehow managed to activate and adjust several pieces of medical equipment without touching any controls. Dr. Rivera had initially thought it was a malfunction, but careful observation revealed that Brave was consciously interfacing with the machines to optimize its own treatment. Captain Rodriguez called a meeting with his senior staff to discuss what Amy Cooper had termed the Alliance proposal. Based on her translation work, it was clear that Loyal and Brave were not simply seeking temporary shelter. They were offering a permanent partnership with the human colony. The Kethemori had observed human behavior for weeks before making contact, and they had concluded that humans possessed psychological traits that complemented their own abilities. Humans were adaptable, resilient, and capable of rapid decision-making under pressure. They could function effectively even when experiencing strong emotions, something that was difficult for the empathically sensitive Kethemori. In exchange for protection and a new home, the Kethemori were offering their unique abilities to help the colony in ways that no human technology could match. They could detect threats before they became dangerous, identify the most trustworthy individuals for sensitive positions, and even help resolve conflicts by understanding the true emotional needs of all parties involved. Dr. Park had been studying the genetic templates that the Kethemori carried within their cellular structure. The biotechnology knowledge they possessed could advance human medical science by decades or even centuries. Their living computers could process information in ways that mechanical systems never could, and their organic spacecraft designs might revolutionize human space travel. But Captain Rodriguez was most interested in the immediate practical benefits of an alliance. The colony was isolated and vulnerable, with minimal defensive capabilities and limited communication with other human settlements. The Kethemori's early warning abilities could provide crucial security advantages. During the staff meeting, Jake Martinez raised an important point about trust. The colony was being asked to make decisions based on the word of aliens they had known for less than a week. How could they be certain that the Kethemori were telling the truth about their situation and their intentions? Dr. Park smiled as she answered. She had been testing the Kethemori's honesty, using their own empathic abilities as a baseline. Both creatures showed consistent emotional patterns when communicating about their past, their current situation, and their hopes for the future. There were no signs of deception or hidden agendas. More importantly, their behavior since arriving had been completely consistent with their claimed desire for peaceful cooperation. They had integrated themselves into colony life, helped with medical procedures, and had even begun contributing to community activities, in small but meaningful ways, Amy. Cooper added that the quantum frequency transmissions she had been monitoring showed no signs of hidden communications or attempts to contact hostile forces. The Kethemori were exactly what they appeared to be, refugees seeking a new home and offering friendship in return for acceptance. Captain Rodriguez made his decision based on both practical considerations and his instincts about the character of their alien guests. The Colony Council would be asked to formally approve the alliance, but he was prepared to recommend acceptance. The benefits clearly outweighed the risks, especially given the potential threat from the Vorthak Empire. If hostile forces were expanding into this region of space, the colony would need every advantage it could get. The Kethemori's abilities could mean the difference between survival and destruction. As the meeting concluded, Captain Rodriguez realized that he was approving the first formal alliance between humans and non-human intelligent beings in the colony's history. It was a decision that would have consequences far beyond New Denver Colony, potentially affecting humanity's future relationships with other species throughout the galaxy. That evening, he visited the medical bay where Loyal and Brave were resting. Through Dr. Park's translation equipment, he formally extended an invitation for the Kethemori to become permanent residents of the colony, with all the rights and responsibilities that citizenship would entail. The response from both creatures was immediate and overwhelming. Their quantum transmissions filled the air with patterns that Amy Cooper later described as pure joy and gratitude. Loyal and Brave had found not just sanctuary, but a new home and a new purpose. As Captain Rodriguez left the medical bay, he reflected on how much his life had changed since Jake Martinez had found 2 injured aliens in the wilderness. The colony was about to embark on an adventure that none of them could have imagined, and he was both excited and terrified about what the future might hold. The alarm that woke Captain Rodriguez at 4 a.m. was not one he had ever heard before. It was the deep resonant tone that indicated an incoming fleet of unknown spacecraft, something that the colony's sensors had been programmed to detect, but which no one had ever expected to actually encounter. Rodriguez rushed to the command center, where he found Amy Cooper and her night shift team frantically analyzing the sensor data. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, showing at least 12 large vessels approaching from the outer system at speeds that suggested highly advanced propulsion technology. Jake Martinez had been called in from his patrol and was coordinating with the colony's small security force. Dr. Park was already in the command center, having been awakened by Loyal and Brave, who had somehow sensed the approaching danger hours before the colony's sensors had detected it. The Kethmori had begun transmitting urgent warnings on their quantum frequencies as soon as the alien fleet had entered the star system. Their empathic abilities allowed them to sense the emotional signatures of the approaching ships, and what they detected filled them with terror that was immediately apparent to every human in their vicinity. Amy Cooper had managed to partially decode the Kethmori's warning transmissions. The approaching fleet belonged to the Vorthak Empire, and they were following the quantum trail that Loyal and Brave had left during their escape from their homeworld. The Vorthak had tracked the survivors across interstellar space with the patience and determination of predators, hunting their prey. Captain Rodriguez assessed the colony's defensive capabilities with growing despair. New Denver Colony had been established as a research and mining outpost, not a military installation. Their defenses consisted of a few automated perimeter weapons, some basic shields around the main facilities, and a small security force that was trained for dealing with local wildlife and minor disputes between colonists. The approaching Vorthak fleet, according to the sensor readings, included several heavy cruisers and what appeared to be troop transports. The colonists were farmers, scientists, and engineers, not soldiers. In a direct confrontation, they would be overwhelmed within hours. Dr. Park was working frantically with Loyal and Brave to understand their warnings about Vorthak tactics and capabilities. The translation was difficult because the Kethmori's descriptions of their enemies were heavily influenced by the psychological trauma they had experienced during the destruction of their homeworld. What emerged from the translations was a picture of an enemy that relied on more than just superior firepower. The Vorthak used fear and despair as weapons, broadcasting psychological attacks that could demoralize defenders before the fighting even began. They were experts at identifying and exploiting the weaknesses of other species. But Loyal and Brave had an idea, something they communicated with increasing urgency as the enemy fleet drew closer. They had been studying human psychological patterns for weeks, and they had discovered something remarkable about human nature that might provide an unexpected advantage. Amy Cooper struggled to translate the complex concepts that the Kethmori were trying to convey. It had something to do with human emotional resilience and the species' ability to function effectively under extreme stress. The Kethmori believed that humans possess psychological traits that could counter the Vorthak's fear-based tactics. Captain Rodriguez made the difficult decision to implement the Kethmori's suggested strategy, despite not fully understanding how it was supposed to work. He had no other options, and he trusted the aliens who had quickly become valued members of his community. The plan required the entire colony to work together in ways that had never been attempted before. The Kethmori would use their empathic abilities to coordinate the colonists' emotional states, creating a unified psychological defense against Vorthak fear weapons. The humans would need to trust their alien allies completely and follow their guidance without question. Jake Martinez organized the civilian evacuation procedures while also coordinating with the security teams. Under normal circumstances, the colonists would have been moved to underground shelters and told to wait for rescue that might never come. Instead, they were being asked to participate in an active defense that relied on untested alien technology and human psychological capabilities that no one fully understood. Dr. Rivera was tasked with setting up medical stations throughout the colony, anticipating casualties from weapons that human medicine had never encountered before. The Kethmori shared what they knew about Vorthak weaponry, but their knowledge was limited by the trauma of their own experiences. As the Vorthak fleet entered the inner system, their psychological warfare broadcast began. The attacks were designed to create overwhelming fear and despair in the target population, making organized resistance impossible. The colonists should have been paralyzed by terror as images of destruction and death filled their minds. But something unexpected happened instead. The Kethmori's empathic abilities allowed them to detect and analyze the incoming psychological attacks, then broadcast counter-frequencies that neutralized their effects. More importantly, they were able to coordinate the human defenders' emotional responses in real time. The result was unlike anything the Vorthak had ever encountered. Instead of a terrified population waiting helplessly for destruction, They faced a unified force that seemed to grow stronger under pressure. The humans' natural adaptability and resilience were enhanced by the Kethmori's empathic coordination, creating a psychological defense that the Vorthak could not penetrate. Engineer Pete Collins, working with maintenance crews throughout the colony, began converting mining equipment and industrial machinery into improvised weapons systems. The plasma cutters used for asteroid mining became defensive beam arrays. The heavy construction vehicles were modified to serve as mobile weapons platforms. Helen Brooks, who normally taught children in the colony school, found herself organizing evacuation routes that could double as tactical supply lines. Her knowledge of the settlement's layout and her ability to coordinate with dozens of families simultaneously made her invaluable for maintaining civilian morale and logistical support. The Kethmori moved throughout the colony, using their empathic abilities to keep the defenders coordinated and focused. They could sense which individuals were reaching their psychological limits and needed support, and which ones were ready to take on additional responsibilities. Their presence seemed to amplify human courage and determination in ways that science could not explain. As the Vorthak ships entered orbit and began their attack, the colonists discovered something remarkable about themselves. When working together with empathic coordination, humans could adapt their strategies and tactics faster than any enemy could respond. They could make split-second decisions based on intuition and emotion that proved more effective than carefully planned military operations. The battle for New Denver Colony became a contest between rigid military doctrine and spontaneous human ingenuity, enhanced by alien empathy. The Vorthak had expected to face scattered individuals driven by fear and panic. Instead, they encountered a unified force that seemed to anticipate their every move and counter it with strategies that defied conventional military logic. Captain Rodriguez found himself coordinating a defense that he barely understood, but somehow knew was working. The colony's communication systems were filled with rapid exchanges between defenders who seemed to know instinctively where they were needed and what they needed to do. As the first wave of Vorthak assault troops landed near the colony's perimeter, they met resistance that should have been impossible. The human defenders fought with the coordination of a pack and the adaptability of individuals, switching between tactics so rapidly that the invaders could not establish effective countermeasures. The Vorthak had come to New Denver Colony expecting an easy victory against a defenseless research outpost. Instead, they found themselves facing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and the psychological vulnerabilities of other species. The battle for New Denver Colony had been raging for 6 hours, and Captain Rodriguez was beginning to understand why the Vorthak Empire had been so successful in their conquests across the galaxy. Their tactics were methodical, brutal, and designed to break the will of defenders through overwhelming psychological pressure combined with superior firepower. But something was happening that defied every military manual and tactical doctrine that Rodriguez had ever studied. The human defenders were not just holding their ground against a superior force. They were actively outmaneuvering and outsmarting an enemy that had conquered dozens of worlds. The key was the unprecedented coordination provided by Loyal and Brave, who had positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the colony where their empathic abilities could link the defenders into a unified fighting force. The Kethmori could sense the emotional states and intentions of every human in the settlement, allowing them to coordinate responses faster than any electronic communication system. Jake Martinez was leading a team of security officers in the northern sector when he experienced the full power of this empathic coordination for the first time. He had been trying to organize an ambush against a Vorthak patrol when he suddenly knew, without any logical explanation, exactly where his teammates were positioned and what they were planning to do. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if he could feel the intentions and emotions of every other defender within his area, creating a tactical awareness that allowed him to predict enemy movements and coordinate countermeasures with perfect timing. Engineer Pete Collins had discovered that the empathic link enhanced not just coordination but also creativity and problem-solving abilities. Working with a team of technicians in the colony's industrial sector, he had managed to convert several mining platforms into mobile artillery units that could move through the settlement's underground tunnels and emerge at unexpected locations. The Vorthak assault troops who were accustomed to facing defenders that relied on fixed positions and predictable tactics, found themselves constantly surprised by weapons that appeared from nowhere and disappeared before they could respond. The humans were fighting like a pack of intelligent predators, using the terrain and their knowledge of the colony to maximum advantage. Dr. Park was coordinating medical support from the colony's hospital when she made a crucial observation about the empathic link's effects on human psychology. The connection was not just allowing better coordination, it was actually making the humans braver and more resilient by sharing emotional strength across the entire group. When one defender began to feel overwhelmed or frightened, the empathic network would automatically provide support from others who were feeling confident and determined. The result was a fighting force that grew stronger under pressure rather than weaker, something that completely contradicted the Vorthak's understanding of psychological warfare. Helen Brooks had organized the civilian population into support teams that provided logistics, medical aid, and intelligence gathering for the military defenders. Her teaching background had given her insights into group dynamics that proved invaluable for maintaining morale and ensuring that every colonist contributed to the defense effort according to their abilities. The children, who would normally have been kept in the safest possible shelters, were instead serving as messengers and lookouts throughout the colony. Their small size and knowledge of the settlement's hidden passages made them ideal for maintaining communication. Between isolated groups of defenders, Amy Cooper was monitoring Vorthak communications from the colony's communication center when she detected signs of confusion and frustration in the enemy transmissions. The Vorthak commanders were having difficulty understanding how the human defenders were coordinating their responses so effectively. Without detectable electronic communications, the aliens had encountered many different species during their expansion across the galaxy, but none had demonstrated the combination of individual creativity and group coordination that the humans were displaying. Their standard tactics, which relied on disrupting enemy communications and creating panic among defenders, were proving completely ineffective. Dr. Rivera had established field medical stations throughout the colony and was amazed by what he was observing in the wounded defenders who were brought to him for treatment. Humans who should have been incapacitated by their injuries were insisting on returning to the fight, and their recovery times were significantly faster than normal. The empathic link seemed to be providing not just emotional support, but also physical resilience, as if the shared determination of the group was helping individual bodies heal and function beyond their normal limits. Rivera had never seen anything like it in his medical career. As the battle continued into its second day, the Vorthak began employing increasingly desperate tactics. They brought in heavier weapons and more aggressive psychological warfare techniques, but nothing seemed to break the unified spirit of the human defenders. Captain Rodriguez realized that they were witnessing something that would change the galaxy's understanding of human nature and capabilities. The empathic coordination provided by the Kethmori had revealed psychological strengths that humans possessed but had never been able to fully utilize. The Vorthak Empire's strategy relied on the assumption that most intelligent species would break under sufficient pressure, becoming disorganized and ineffective when faced with overwhelming odds. But humans connected through empathic links seemed to become more organized and effective as the pressure increased. Jake Martinez led a daring raid on one of the Vorthak command positions, using tactics that emerged spontaneously from the empathic coordination. His team moved through the colony like a single organism, each member knowing instinctively what the others were planning and adapting their actions accordingly. The raid succeeded beyond all expectations, capturing crucial intelligence about Vorthak fleet dispositions and command structures. More importantly, it demonstrated that humans could use the empathic link not just for defense but also for complex offensive operations that required split-second timing and perfect coordination. Engineer Collins managed to disable one of the Vorthak heavy assault vehicles by coordinating simultaneous attacks from multiple improvised weapons positions. The timing required for the operation would have been impossible using normal communication methods, but the empathic link allowed the defenders to act with the precision of a single mind, controlling multiple bodies. As the third day of battle began, Vorthak reinforcements arrived from their fleet in orbit, but instead of strengthening their position, the additional troops only provided more targets for the increasingly sophisticated tactics being employed by the human defenders. The colonists had learned to fight as a unified force while maintaining the individual creativity and adaptability that made humans unique among galactic species. They could implement complex strategies that emerged organically from group consciousness while still responding to unexpected situations with individual innovation. Dr. Park observed that the empathic link was allowing humans to access psychological capabilities that had probably existed throughout their evolutionary history, but had been dormant due to lack of proper coordination mechanisms. The Kethmori had essentially unlocked human potential that had been waiting for the right catalyst. The Vorthak, faced with defenders who seemed to anticipate their every move and counter their tactics faster than should have been possible, began to show signs of demoralization in their own ranks. For the first time in their military history, they were facing an enemy that appeared to be learning and adapting faster than they could respond. Captain Rodriguez knew that the battle was approaching a critical point, where the Vorthak would either commit their remaining forces to a final assault or withdraw to regroup and develop new strategies. Either way, the colony had already achieved something remarkable by proving that humans could stand against one of the galaxy's most feared military forces when properly coordinated and motivated. The silence that fell over New Denver Colony after the Vorthak fleet retreated was unlike anything Captain Rodriguez had ever experienced. For 3 days, the air had been filled with the sounds of battle, emergency communications, and the constant hum of empathic coordination between the defenders. Now there was only the gentle morning breeze and the distant sounds of colonists emerging from their defensive positions. Jake Martinez stood on the observation deck of the command center, watching as the last Vorthak ships disappeared beyond the outer planets. The enemy fleet had withdrawn during the night, apparently convinced that the cost of conquering the colony would be higher than any potential benefits they might gain. The retreat had been as methodical and organized as their initial assault, but Dr. Park's analysis of intercepted communications revealed something unprecedented in Vorthak military history. For the first time, they had encountered defenders who actually became more effective as the battle progressed, learning and adapting faster than the Vorthak could develop countermeasures. Amy Cooper was documenting the battle's aftermath when she made a discovery that would change everything for both species involved. The empathic link that had connected the human defenders throughout the conflict had not disappeared when the fighting ended. Instead, it had evolved into something permanent and voluntary. The colonists found that they could still sense each other's emotions and intentions when they chose to, but they could also maintain their individual privacy and independence. The Kethmori's empathic abilities had somehow catalyzed a latent human capacity for telepathic connection that remained active even without constant alien assistance. Loyal and Brave were exhausted from the constant effort of maintaining coordination among hundreds of humans during the battle, but they were also exhilarated by what they had discovered about their new allies. The humans had not just survived the Vorthak assault. They had demonstrated psychological capabilities that the Kethmori had never encountered in any other species. Dr. Rivera was treating the wounded from both species when he observed something that amazed him. The humans who had been most closely connected to the empathic link during the battle were healing faster than normal, and their recovery seemed to be enhanced by continued emotional contact with their fellow defenders. More remarkably, Loyal and Brave were also showing signs of accelerated healing, apparently benefiting from their connection to human emotional resilience and determination. The empathic link was proving to be mutually beneficial, enhancing the physical and psychological well-being of both species. Captain Rodriguez convened a colony council meeting to address the question that everyone was asking. What happened next? The battle had proven that humans and Kethmori could work together in ways that neither species could achieve alone. But the implications of that discovery extended far beyond the borders of New Denver Colony. During the meeting, Loyal and Brave made a formal request through Amy Cooper's translation equipment. They asked for permission to become permanent citizens of the colony, not as refugees seeking shelter but as equal partners in building a new kind of community that had never existed before in galactic history. The Kethmori explained that their observations of human behavior during the crisis had convinced them that humanity represented something unique among intelligent species. Humans could extend their natural pack loyalty beyond their own kind, accepting aliens as genuine family members rather than just allies of convenience. Engineer Pete Collins raised practical questions about how such an arrangement would work. The colony's infrastructure had been designed for humans, and many systems would need to be modified to accommodate the Keth-Mori's different physiology and technological preferences. But Helen Brooks pointed out that the modifications could benefit everyone. The Keth-Mori's biotechnology knowledge could help the colony develop more efficient and sustainable systems, while human engineering skills could help preserve and adapt Keth-Mori technology for use in their new environment. Dr. Park was already planning research programs that would combine human scientific methods with Keth-Mori empathic abilities to explore questions that neither species could investigate alone. The study of consciousness, emotion, and interspecies communication could advance dramatically with their cooperation. The Colony Council voted unanimously to accept Loyal and Brave as full citizens, with all the rights and responsibilities that status entailed. It was a decision that would be remembered as the founding moment of the first truly integrated interspecies community. In known galactic history, Amy Cooper began broadcasting news of the colony's successful defense and the new alliance to other human settlements throughout the region. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with requests for more information coming from colonies, research stations, and even military commands throughout human space. Within weeks, New Denver Colony had become the most famous human settlement in the galaxy. Diplomats, scientists, and military observers arrived to study the unprecedented cooperation between humans and Keth-Mori that had defeated one of the most feared military forces in known space. But the most important visitors were other survivors. Amy's broadcasts had been detected by Keth-Mori refugees hiding throughout the galaxy, and they began making their way to the colony that had become a beacon of hope for their scattered species. Each new arrival brought knowledge and skills that added to the growing capabilities of the integrated community. Some Keth-Mori were biotechnology specialists who could grow living computers and organic spacecraft. Others were empathic healers who could treat psychological trauma in ways that conventional medicine could not match. Jake Martinez found his role evolving from colony security officer to interspecies relations coordinator. His experience during the battle had given him insights into how humans and Keth-Mori could work together effectively, and he became responsible for helping new arrivals integrate into the community. Dr. Rivera established the galaxy's first interspecies medical program, training human doctors to work with Keth-Mori healers and developing treatment protocols that combined the best of both species' medical knowledge. The results were revolutionary, with healing techniques that addressed both physical and emotional aspects of health simultaneously. Within a year, New Denver Colony had grown from a small research outpost to a thriving city that attracted visitors and new residents from across the galaxy. The unique partnership between humans and Keth-Mori had created innovations in technology, medicine, psychology, and social organization that benefited everyone. The Vorthak Empire, meanwhile, had classified New Denver Colony as a forbidden zone and warned their military forces to avoid the system entirely. The defeat had shaken their confidence in their traditional tactics and forced them to reconsider their expansion strategies throughout the region. Captain Rodriguez, now serving as the colony's first interspecies mayor, often reflected on the chain of events that had led to this remarkable transformation. It had all started with a simple act of compassion when Jake Martinez had responded to a desperate alien's plea for help. That single moment of kindness had grown into something that changed the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when different species chose to trust and support each other. The empathic bonds between humans and Keth-Mori had proven that cooperation could create capabilities that neither species could achieve alone. As evening fell over the colony, families of both species gathered in the common areas to share meals and stories. Human children played with young Keth-Mori, learning to communicate through emotional resonance as naturally as they learned spoken language. Loyal often visited these gatherings, approaching newcomers and projecting feelings of warmth, acceptance, and belonging that needed no translation. The simple gesture that had started as a plea for help had become a greeting that welcomed all beings to a community where differences were celebrated and cooperation created strength. The colony's motto, suggested by Amy Cooper and approved by unanimous vote, was displayed in both human languages and Keth-Mori empathic patterns throughout the settlement. It read simply, "Together we are more than the sum of our parts." And in the quiet moments when the colony settled into sleep, the gentle hum of empathic harmony could be felt by anyone who chose to listen, a reminder that the greatest achievements in the galaxy came not from conquest or domination, but from the simple decision to help a stranger in need.